Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, the natural protector of the psyche. Developing a relationship with the wildish nature is an essential part of women's individuation. In order to accomplish this, a woman must go into the dark, but at the same time she must not be irreparably trapped, captured, or killed on her way there or back. The Bluebeard story is about the captor, the dark man who inhabits all women's psyches, the innate predator. He is a specific and incontrollable force which must be memorized and restrained. To restrain the natural predator, the psyche is necessary for women to remain in possession of all their instinctual powers. Some of these are insight, intuition, endurance, tenacious loving, keen sensing, far vision, acute hearing, singing over the head, intuitive healing, intending to their own creative fires. In psychological interpretation, we call on all aspects of the fairy tale to represent the drama within a single woman's psyche. Bluebeard represents a deeply reclusive complex which lurks at the edge of all women's life, watching, waiting for an opportunity to oppose her. Although it might symbolize itself similarly or differently in men's psyches, it is the ancient and contemporary foe of both genders. It is difficult to completely comprehend the Bluebeardian force, for it is innate, meaning indigenous to all humans from birth forward, and in that sense is without conscious origin. Yet I believe we have a hint of how its nature developed in the preconscious of humans. For in the story, Bluebeard is called a failed magician. In this occupation, he is related to figures on other fairy tales which also portray the malignant predator of the psyche as a rather normative-looking but immeasurably destructive man. Immeasurably. Using this description as an archetypical trope, we compare it to what we know of failed sorcery or failed spiritual power into mythos story. The Greek Icarus flew too close to the sun and his waxing wings melted, catapulting him to the earth. The Sunni myth, The Boy and the Eagle, tells a boy who would have become a member of the Eagle Kingdom, but for thinking he could break the rules of death. As he soared through the sky, his borrowed eagle coat was torn for him and he fell to his doom. In Christianity myth, Lucifer claimed equality with Yahweh and was driven down to the underworld. In folklore, there are many numbers of sorcerers' apprentices who foolishly dared to venture beyond their actual skill levels by attempting to contravene nature. They were punished by injury and cataclysm. As we examine these leitmotifs, we see the predators in them desire superiority and power over others. They carry a kind of psychological inflation within the entity, wishes to be loftier than, as big as, and equal to the infinable, which traditionally distributes and controls the mysterious forces of nature, including the systems of life and death and the rules of human nature and so forth. In myth and story, we find that the consequence for an entity attempting to break, bend, or alter the operation mode of the ineffable is to be chastened either by having to endure this diminished ability in the world of mystery and magic, such as apprentices who are no longer allowed to practice, or lonely exile from the land of the gods, or a similar loss of grace and power through bumbling, crippling, or death. If we can understand the Bluebeard as being the internal representative of the entire myth of such an outcast, we then might also be able to comprehend the deep and inexplicable loneliness which sometimes washes over us, because he experiences a continuous exile from redemption. The problem posed in the Bluebeard tale is that rather than empowering the light of the young feminine forces of the psyche, he instead filled with hatred and desires to kill the lights of the psyche. It is not hard to imagine that in such a malignant formation there is a trapped one who once wished for surpassing light and fell from grace because of it. We can understand why thereafter the exile one maintains a heartless pursuit of the light of others. We can imagine that it hopes that if it could gather enough souls to itself, it could make a blaze of light that will finally rescind its darkness and repairs its loneliness. In this sense, we have that at the beginning of the tale a formidable being in his unredeemed aspect, yet this fact is one of the central truths of the younger sister in the tale must acknowledge, that all women must acknowledge, that both within and without there is a force which will act in opposition to the instincts of the natural self, and that malignant force is what it is. Though we might have mercy upon it, our first action must be recognized it, to protect ourselves from its devastations and ultimately to deprive it of its murderous energy. All creatures must learn that there exist predators. Without this knowing, a woman will be unable to negotiate safely within her own forest without being devoured. To understand the predator is to become a mature animal who is not vulnerable out of naivete, inexperience, or foolishness. Like a screwed tracker, Bluebeard senses the youngest daughter is interested in him, that is, willing to be prey. He asks for her in marriage, and in the moment of youthful exuberance, which is often a combination of folly, pleasure, happiness, and sexual intrigue, she says, What woman does not recognize this scenario? Naive women as prey. The younger sister, the most undeveloped one, plays out the very human story of the naive woman. She will be captured temporarily by her own interior stalker, yet she will out in the end wiser and stronger, and recognize the willy predator of her own psyche on sight. The psychological story underlying the tale also applies to the older woman who has not yet completely learned to recognize the innate predator. Perhaps she has begun the process over and over again, but lacking guidance and support has not yet finished with it. This is why teaching stories are so nourishing. They provide initiatory maps, so even work which has hit a snag can be completed. The Bluebeard story is valuable to all women regardless of whether they are very young and just learning about the predator, or whether they have been hounded and harassed by it for decades, and are at least redying for a final and decisive battle with it. The younger sister represents a creative potential within the psyche, something that is going toward exuberant and fashioning life. But there is a detour, and she agrees to become a prize of a vicious man because her instincts to notice and do otherwise are not intact. Psychologically, young girls and young boys are as though asleep about the fact that they themselves are prey. Although sometimes it seems life would be much easier and much less painful if all humans were born totally awake, they are not. We're all born unlanguing. Like the potential at the center of a cell. In biology, the unlanguage is the part of a cell characterized as that which will become. Within the unlanguage, it is the primal substance which in time will develop, causing us to become a complete someone. So our lives as women are ones of quickening the unlanguage. The Bluebeard tale speaks to the awakening and education of this psychic center, this glowing cell. In service of this education, the youngest sister agrees to marry a force which she believes to be very elegant. The fairy tale marriage represents a new status being sought, a new layer of the psyche about the unfurled. However, the young wife was fooled herself. Initially, she felt fearful of Bluebeard. She was wary. However, a little pressure out of the woods causes her to overrule her intuition. Almost all women have had this experience at least once. As a result, she persuades herself that Bluebeard is not dangerous, but only idiosyncratic and eccentric. Oh, how silly! Why am I so put off by a little old Bluebeard? Her wildish nature, however, has already sniffed out the situation and knows the Bluebeard man is lethal. But the naive Psyche disallows this inner knowing. This error of judgment is almost routine in a woman so young that her alarm systems are not yet developed. She is like an orphan wolf pup who rolls and plays in the clearing, heedless of the 19-pound bobcat approaching from the shadows, in the case of the older woman who is cut away from the wild that she can barely hear. The inner warnings she too proceeds, smiling naively. You might well wonder if all this could be avoided. As in the animal world, a young girl learns to see the predator via her mother's and father's teachings. Without parents' loving guidance, she will certainly be the prey early on. In hindsight, almost all of us have, at least, experienced a compelling idea of semi-dazzling person crawling in through our psychic windows at night and catching us off guard, even though they were wearing a sky mask, have a knife between their teeth and a sack of money slung over their shoulder. We believe them when they tell us they're in the banking business. However, even with wise mothering and fathering, the young female might especially begin about age 12 to be seduced away from her own truth by peer groups, cultural forces, or psychic pressures, and so begins a rather reckless risk-taking in order to find out for herself. When I work with older teenage girls who are convinced that the world is good if they only work When I work with older teenage girls who are convinced that the world is good if they only work it right, it always makes me feel like an old gray-haired dog. I want to put my paws over my eyes and groan, for I see what they do not see. I know, especially if they are willful and feisty, that they are going to insist on becoming involved with the predator at least once before they're shocked awake. So true. At the beginning of our life, our feminine viewpoint is very naive, meaning that the emotional understanding of the cover is very faint. But these were all being as females. We are naive and we talk ourselves into some very confusing situations. To be initiating the ways of these matters means that we are in a time of our life when we are vulnerable to seeing only the overt. Among wolves, when the bitch leaves her pups to go hunting, the young ones try to follow her out of the den and down the path. She snarls at them, lunges at them, and scares the bejesus out of them. Out of them all, they run sleeping and sliding back to the den. Their mother knows her pups do not yet know how to wait and ask as other creatures. They do not know how is a predator and how is not, but in time she will teach them, but heartily and well. Like wolf pup, women need a similar initiation, one which teaches that their inner and outer worlds are not always happy-go-lucky places. Many women do not even have the basic teaching about predators that a wolf mother gives her pups, such as, if it is threatened and bigger than you, flee. If it is weaker, see what you can do. If it is sick, leave it alone. If it has quills, poison, fangs, or razor claws, back up and go in the other direction. If it smells nice but is wrapped around metal jaws, walk on by. Somebody seeing this, give me a second. Go on the flow. Just think about what we have read already. Takes a minute. There we go. Their younger sister in the story is not only naive, but her own mental process and totally ignorant about the